Are you wondering how to communicate with your team during a crisis? My name is Jamie Hammond, and this is Speak, Grow, Rise. And in today's video, I'm talking with communication expert Brandon Joel, and we're discussing the best ways to communicate with teams in a crisis. If you want more tips on how to speak, grow, and rise, be sure to like this video and subscribe so that you never miss another Speak, Grow, Rise tip again. Let's go into the replay of our conversation. So I reached out to Brandon just because with the type of content that I try to put out there, I'm always more interested in helping young professionals speak, grow, and rise. And the best way that we can do that is the way that we're talking and the way that we're connecting. And so you may or may not have seen the article that we released yesterday that has some of these questions. We'll be talking about those and more, just depending on how the discussion goes. And then if we've got any questions or anything, then we can try to answer those as well. So let's get started. Brandon, since like I said, I'm the one with the questions, I'll just hit you up and then you can share your expertise about communication and organizational communication with us. So my first question is, how can we communicate effectively during a crisis when a team is entirely or mostly working from home?
Right. That's a really good question. I think the first thing we have to realize as a collective is it's going to be a rough transition. You know, how quickly we come out of that rough transition, that's going to be the marker of how effective the team is working together. As I mentioned in the article, one of the first things that we need to do is we need to try to create an environment where people feel comfortable enough to be honest about their situation. You want people to be transparent. You know, there are going to be some people who have 4 kids at home and, you know, have dogs running around the house. And there are going to be some other people that have spotty internet or, you know, everybody's situation is different right now. And I think if managers or people within the team try to take the time and make everyone feel comfortable of letting people know what is going on in their different lives, then the team can work together in order to build a communication model that's going to allow people to be flexible with how they do things within the group.
I love all of that. And so you were talking about, most importantly, lives, you know, and like the way that our lives and our work is coming together. And before all of this happened, we all, I feel like, tried to keep our work life and our personal life separate. And so it was much more respectable for somebody in general to leave their problems at the door when they walk into the office. And so then my next question is, how much space should managers now make for fear, emotions, or just life things that come up in the workplace now that the workplace is at home?
Right. I think what helps people is the fact that everybody is going through this right now. I think it'd be kind of harder, you know, for people before to be like, oh, trying to make special arrangements for different people, but literally everybody is going through this situation. So it's okay to be a little unconventional. You know what I'm saying? When people are trying to process something as extreme as this crisis right now, it's going to take everybody a different amount of time, just like people have to communicate what's going differently at their home situation and how productive they can be. We also need to try to create different types of spaces for people. You know, the workplace is now at home, so we physically have a lot of different spaces to try to navigate now. And so I think if managers are aware that we need to try to navigate different spaces, then they can try to control or appoint certain spaces for certain emotions. So for example, as I mentioned in the article, it might be helpful to create a space or a time outside of work for managers to do like a check-in or how is everybody doing? Let's talk about this. Let's make space for our emotions and our personal lives just to let our team know what's going on. And then that way, once we come back into the professional realm, it gives people the opportunity to be a little bit more focused. They feel like they are going to be heard because we've had the opportunity to listen to them. Maybe it's not in this space, but they have had a platform and the space actually conveyed their emotions and situations to their team.
I love everything about that. And I think that we've seen, and I mean, I have to agree because that space is just so important and that connection is so important between managers, between employees, and for the company as a whole. And I know that just from talking to people, in my experience, friends that I have, all that we're all navigating this crisis differently, as you said, we've also seen companies and organizations handle this crisis differently. We've had some that have been more transparent about their financial situation, for example, and then other companies that I've heard about haven't been sharing any information at all. And so in those opportunities to connect that you were just talking about, what do you think is the best way for companies and their leadership to communicate with their teams for this crisis or anything like this that comes up in the future?
Well, I think transparency is the key word kind of throughout this entire thing. We want the employees to be transparent about their situations and to be trusting of the managers with that information so they can create a very effective working environment for them. But it also needs to work the other side as well. The managers need to be a little bit transparent with the employee on what's happening with the actual organization. Now, I will caution, transparent does not mean, oh my gosh, the world is on fire, everybody panic, everything is the worst it's ever been. No, that is not what I'm saying at all. Be transparent in a way that people know what's going on with the overarching or overall mission and goals of the organization, but be transparent to the individual knows how they might be impacted. How might what's happening with the company hurt their job performance, their working responsibilities? Those are the things that people want to know. They don't want to know the specific dots and figures of, oh, if we don't have this market here, then we're not going to have this. Like, that's just going to overwhelm and burden people. You know, give people what they can handle right now. That's the whole point of having people be transparent so we can work around things together. So in the spirit of being transparent, let people know how they might be impacted. And once you have given them that information, give them the space to process it and then come back to you so you can work together on how to do this. Now, I have a question for you. So with your transition to home, what are some trends that you've noticed with trying to build or establish some communication with your team?
That's such a good question. And you started to answer a lot of it just with like the processing of things and the importance of that. The craziest thing is how everyone is processing all of this differently, and then managing messaging, or at least like connecting with everybody in a way that is as close to one size fits all, while also understanding that everyone's going through their own process. So like for me, I had been reading the news before this happened. And so then I felt like I had just kind of like already mentally switched to this. So then the day that my company had said, okay, we're going to shift to working at home, I was like ready. And so then I was like, we're going to have daily tag ups where we're going to just like check in so that we can still stay that we're together, or like feel that we're together. And then we'll do our one-on-ones the same way that we have before. And so like, I kind of like jumped into a plan, but it was interesting how so many of my colleagues had not done that yet. And so many people for those first couple of weeks, like the first couple of weeks of March, either felt like this wasn't going to go on forever, or it certainly
Right.
didn't need to go on for longer than 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
like, why do we even need to like change any of our, so then I was like way on one end. And then I had my peers and other people that were way on the other end. And then like, that was certainly a hard shift for me, because I was like, why aren't we communicating? Like, this is all going on. And it certainly taught me a lot of empathy too, to remember that everybody has to go through their own experience, but that doesn't change the fact that we want to be transparent with whatever details that we can, so that we all know where we're going. While like nothing that we're talking about here is reflective of the company that I work for, I am really excited about the fact that my company has been very transparent from the beginning of what it is that we're doing, what our goals are. So like we've shared a lot of figures, you know, from the top down. And I think that that's been really helpful, because I saw this really incredible shift in our organization once everybody knew what the plan was, and how we all, like as a force of 550 or more people, went towards one goal. And we were like, I know that you're struggling. I know that it's hard. I know that we're all going through a lot, but we're here for our clients. And I don't think that that would have happened if we didn't have the overall goal, and that we weren't transparent with all of that information. But then I heard from other people that I had talked to from their company, where they didn't know anything that was going on. So then they were like, I don't know if I'm going to get fired. I don't know if I'm going to get furloughed. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to have a job tomorrow. And so I would say that the way that we have navigated that as much as possible on our team has been with regular, more than normal connection and meeting up as a team,
Yeah.
and constant enforcement and encouragement
of like, if you're feeling something, share that with somebody. If you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling unproductive, if you are feeling anxious, say that to somebody, because somebody's going to have an answer for you. But if you're just isolated at home and you're just like, holding on to all of that, it's not going to get addressed. And it's so easy to pretend like you're leaving the problems at the door when you're not.
Yeah.
And so that's about how we've been handling it. Certainly from what I've seen, most of that transparency, to try to, just because like, what else can you talk about? Like pretend that all of this isn't going on. That's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help the company get to its goals. It's certainly not going to help our clients in our case. So that's how we've handled that. And so I want to flip it back to you and ask you a question.
Yeah.
That wasn't in the article, but I am interested in learning more about this idea of transparency in general. And from your experience, why is it that transparency and honesty is so important for the receiver in a message, and especially in an organization like this?
Right. Well, the first thing I want to say is transparency does not mean something brief and immediate. I am not going to give you immediate information that answers all of your questions. That is not what transparency implies. It might be something that people might think or assume, but that is not what that means. Transparency is more of a retroactive process. When you know something that changes, let me know when something changes, because everything is kind of unstable right now, So companies are trying their best to adapt. So let's just try to give them the benefit of the doubt. So once you get more information, or if the circumstances have changed both positively and negatively, that is something that you really want to try to include people in that process, because the worst thing that you can do is make someone feel that they're guessing. Like, oh, and like you just said, like, am I going to get fired? What is about to happen with my job? That is probably going to restrict work performance than actually being more transparent about what they're needing to do, because at least they're not focusing on that. You want to try to get their attention back to the work. You know what I'm saying? That's why we're creating different spaces, because if we have a space for you to be concerned and I'll hear what you're talking about, when you're actually dedicating your time to work, you don't have to worry about these other things, because we've made the space for you to work on it as well. And also, it's not going to be perfect. It's not. And I think from the receiver end, if you know some of the things, some of the surrounding factors that a company has to go through, you might be more empathetic as the employee if they have let you know what is going on, rather than if they don't know there's an issue, why would they care about it as well? So it's a whole bunch of different things, but I think the most important thing for us to take away is transparency isn't a quick, immediate process. It's something that happens retroactively, and it's a process that managers have to customize for each individual or for a team, and then let people know as they do.
That is fantastic. And I feel like it's just a missed opportunity because I don't have it written down. I was looking for something so I could write that down, because that's just such good advice. And, my next question was going to be, what is the best way to communicate with and work with our employees one-on-one? And it sounds like the additional part of what you're saying is that the best way to do that is to be transparent at every step, and that it's not just a one-time thing where you're like, well, we rolled out this information and so everyone should know. Yeah, we talked about it and so you should know. So would you agree with that it changes every time something in the process changes?
Yes. Also think of it from this way too. In your personal life, you might have a family member who unfortunately contracts COVID. Your entire dynamic of what's your priority and what your responsibilities are, that completely changes. So that is why it's important to have that check-in. And kind of tying that into what you were just asking about, the one-on-one relationship, I think the best thing a manager can do, or I'll talk about some of my best managers, the best things that they have done for me is ask me, what do you want? What are you trying to get out of this? Let me be transparent about what I am trying to get, and then somehow taking the objectives of the organization and finding room for my interests and my own personal development. That way, I feel like I have a stake in this. If you just are in your job and I'm just going to do my job function, and it can get monotonous. But if your manager can have this one-on-one relationship with you where they know your personal goals, they know what you're trying to get out of it, and they find a place for it within the organization, you not only are professionally invested, but you are personally invested because you're getting some fulfillment out of it in a lot of different areas in your life. And also, that makes the person feel like they're being supported by their manager. You know what I'm saying? I personally thrive in spaces because I've had managers who have just wanted to listen to me, let me feel like I've been heard if I have a grievance or if I need something to change in my working environment for me to be more efficient. They will take it into consideration and try to work with me. I think this constant checking in with individuals is something that I think works really, really well with teams. I know for my job at Cornell, my boss calls every single person on our team every single day. And that's separate from our Zoom meetings and our scheduled conference calls. He just calls every single person on the team early in the morning for like 10, 15 minutes. How are you today? Have things changed? What can I do to support you today? Is there something that I could be doing differently? Is there something that the team could be doing to support you differently? And I think creating the different time for those, or creating those little nuggets, I feel like I'm being heard. I feel like you care about me and like what I can contribute outside of work. And I think it really makes a big difference. And our team works very, very well together because the little check-ins, they help. And I'm aware of what's going on with one of my other coworkers and I can check in with her. And it's a great process because even though we have our scheduled, structured time to do things, having that just even 10, 15 minutes a day of just letting someone be heard improves the one-on-one relationship. I'm very honest with my boss about what's going on in my life. Sometimes it's a little TMI, but I'm like, here, just so you know, this is what's going on with me. And I think that has allowed me to be a lot more productive in what I'm doing and able to produce in my job.
So I have 2 more questions. Again, not in the article, but I'm loving this. This is exactly what I was hoping out of this conversation. And you're bringing so many good things to this conversation. So it's a 2-part question.
Okay.
First, you had talked about, I'd love to hear an example of what some of these, you did a little bit, but what a conversation like this, like that kind of one-on-one and where you're saying like what's going on now, what an example of a conversation of aligning those goals right now might look like for somebody who might be watching this and maybe like really likes the idea but wants to know how to apply this kind of conversation, what it is that as a manager you can ask them to so that you can get your employee to share that kind of information for you, and then also the kind of things that they might want to look for. And then if we have the time too, I'd really love to talk more about the importance of that connection that you're talking about, that daily connection, and why that's so important right now, and why those phone calls are so important to you right now. On our team, just to give you a little bit of context, at least like what we've been doing is we've been having a daily meeting every day. And so I used to have a smaller team and we were able to do it a little bit more frequently. But now that I've got a larger team, we do it every day. It's always for 15 minutes a day. And my thought was, I don't want them to feel isolated every day. So I want them to have the opportunity to talk. And it sounds like you really like the idea of having that one-on-one time regularly too. And so tell me more about all of that. I asked you a lot of questions, and so, answer them in whatever way you see fit.
Blend them in together.
Yeah, blend them in together, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think the one-on-one is so special to me because everybody is going through a very similar situation to a degree right now, and having someone take a time to just be like, how are you doing? Like, what is going on in your world? Even for me as an individual, it helps me to cut the world off, and it helps me to do my own mental check-in. Like, how am I doing? Like, am I okay? Like, yeah, like I'm okay. Like, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but thank you for asking, because it allowed me to get a little introspective, because right now so much is happening around us in our world, and we might forget to check in on ourselves. So when he talks to me, it's like he specifically wants to know what's happening with me. And I'm like, great. 15 minutes of the day, I'm like, all right, here's what's going on in my life. Here's what I need to prioritize. And it just gets me thinking. And that's why I personally value it so much, just because it just forces me to think about what I need to do to make sure that Brandon is together so I can be the most productive in every other space of my life. And then going to what you were saying about the types of conversations that you need to have with your individual employees. Hopefully your boss has already created a different space to talk about feelings and emotions to some degree. But when it comes back to the workplace, the manager first needs to understand that productivity, the things that you produce, it probably cannot be at the same level that it was for everyone else. So I think one of the first things that people should be thinking to ask is, what's changed for you? Do you feel like you can perform your job effectively in the same way? You know, what are the factors that are now changing those things and your ability to do that? And I think a good way of doing it, as an example, are deadlines. So, okay, normally you give me a day or a weekly report Friday at 5 o'clock. Maybe now that you're at home and you have kids or something, that's unrealistic. You know, some people have to homeschool now. So maybe it's a conversation of, normally I am able to produce work in this type of manner. So I think it allows for the manager and the person to kind of change their tacit agreement of, hey, things need to work a little bit differently now. Like, I need to be able to prioritize and promote work in a very different way. And also, and I'll flip this around on you. So once I've asked you about your priorities and like the types of work that you can produce, what is something that you would want to know?
The most important thing that I've been asking is, what I want to know, how my people feel as those things change. And so we were talking earlier about transparency at every level. And I think it's the in-between that you were talking about, where those gaps get filled. If you don't provide context as the people with the information, like those in power that have that kind of information, if you don't share that information and the context, people are forced to fill in those gaps on their own. And so the conversations that I typically have, that I'm most interested in all the time, but probably what I'm learning from you is that I'm too interested in, and that there's other questions that I can be asking, is if new questions have arisen and if they're filling in those gaps in the between times. And so I'm always interested in, like, how are you feeling about things? Do you have any questions about anything that's going on? I'm always like, like looking at them to see like if they, if their body language tells me something, it's just because I want to make sure that if I have information, or if there's something that I can do, that I can provide that kind of context in whatever way that I can. But the thing that's so interesting about what you're talking about is that for me as a manager, that has been what I've relied upon, really out of a feeling of like, I can't control much, so I can control this. Like, I can control as much of the information that I share with them. But what I love about what you're saying is the connection that you're asking managers and people who lead teams and people who are responsible for other people and even coworkers. You're challenging us to ask better questions that are specific to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the most important takeaway out of this whole conversation, that is like just specific to this live. It's not going to be anywhere else. It's going to be right here, is that, and is the importance of asking questions about what's happening specifically and uniquely to them in this moment, and how is that affecting our goals from here, and what do we need to do in order for all of our goals to be met. And I just think that that's such an important point to make that gets missed a lot in times of crisis, because we're like you said, we're all running around and everybody's just doing their best. But I think, like, if we can, as managers and as coworkers, remember that we both have goals, whatever their experiences is and whatever my experience is, and if we can talk about that openly and honestly together, that's the best way that we can get to that. And I think that's the theme of everything that we're talking about. So thank you for that.
No problem. Just as a follow-up to that, I think you kind of helped me segue into the next thing I was going to say. I think it's the idea of helping guide people on what to focus on. So I think if we can kind of compartmentalize things for people, say, hey, I know we have this big pie right now. This slice, this is what I need you to focus on. Put your energy here. And if anything else changes in your life, or if you can't handle anything else, just focus on this part of the pie. This, by you handling this part of the pie, you are still contributing to the team. You are still making a difference to the overall mission. But if you can just handle and execute this little thing, and we talk about this in the article, like, let's just focus it, dwindle it down for people so it's manageable. They feel like they can be in control of it, as you were saying before. And then that way, if they can execute this small little piece of the puzzle, they really feel like they're contributing to the team. And I feel like that'll also help optimize your workings within your team.
I love everything about that. If you're watching this live, or if you're watching this video, even in the replay, I mean, man, if there's a takeaway, that is it. If there's a nugget that can make us all better leaders, it's exactly what Brandon just said, and I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you so much. I know we're running a little low on time, but I just want to ask you one last question, because it's what I think is, what inspired me to think about this is, how do you think, if you could put your like futurist hat on, how do you think that communication is going to change in teams and in organizations from here? And the reason why I'm asking is because I feel like before all of this happened, what we saw was companies maybe like holding their cards close to the chest, certainly with like in politics. And with political organizations, there was this like hush hush, like, oh, we can't let people see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And what this has all forced us to do is to open the curtain, at least with what we can, at least in our companies, and say, we're human beings, you are human beings, and we're all just doing our best. And so I guess my question is, how do you think this is going to change? And do you think that we will have to continue, like people will demand this of their leadership after this?
I think it will be almost like survival of the fittest. The companies who don't do it won't survive. I know that's very maybe blunt, it's just what it is. We all just went digital overnight. Our society completely changed in an instant. And the companies, other than things that like having to physically be there, and we're not talking about those contributing factors for business who can't sustain themselves right now, but for the companies who can and aren't trying to include other people in the process and transition both their companies online and their communication and how they engage with their employees, they won't last long. Big companies have to. The really, really successful companies, you are going to get emails at least giving you a general note on what is happening. That is them adapting, because from the bottom up, they have to know how the system works. If you're not including everybody, then how would you sustain your system? You're only as strong as your weakest part, is what, the saying is. And that's so true. And if there were a weak part, and, within an organization, they still need to be included, because you still need them to make the whole thing go. And so if people think that, oh, I can just keep things to myself, no, the world is literally different now. I can imagine that a lot of companies are going to say, wow, we can save a lot of money by not having like a physical building and people can work from home. That is where our society is shifting now too, So I think people need to think, okay, how we did things before, maybe that worked then. But if people are at home and they don't have that daily connection or the culture and reading the environment and reading body language, you take all those things away, all the implicit nonverbal communication that happens at a company, you take that away, an employee is just sitting in their house, waiting for instructions, waiting to know what's next. That's not good. You know what I'm saying? Because like we were saying before, their focus can be anywhere right now. So how can they focus on executing this one part of the puzzle? How do they know that that part of the puzzle is important? Will they still need this part of the puzzle? That is why it's so important to try to include people on conversations. Like we say, you don't have to tell everybody everything, but I think this is going to expose the people who are really trying to include people in the process and letting people know what's happening. Also, people are very vulnerable right now. You know what I'm saying? So they want to feel like their company or organization is trying to look out for them as well, to bring them in from the cloud or the shroud, where you see it in politics, you see it with big corporations, people that are being called out right now, they feel vulnerable because they don't know how things might impact their lives. So we want to try to protect the weak link, which there are no weak parts in a team. Any good manager will tell you that. But also we want to make people feel like they're vulnerable, because if people feel vulnerable, that's going to impact a part of the system and keep the organization from working as effectively as they could. So as people are transitioning online, you have to try to give almost more information, because some of the implicit things that we even subconsciously don't consciously aware that we get from those things, we need to try to supplement that in some type of way and offer more information to try to fill in those gaps.
Fantastic. Gosh, what a load of information that you just shared. And for anyone who's watching this right now, especially if you're in a management position, I think the biggest thing that we've learned from that is that we have very clear takeaways here from Brandon that show us the kinds of things that we can start thinking about already for when we're after this, whether or not you're in an organization that decides to shift entirely or decides to do that. One thing is clear is that amount of information is going to be really necessary for all of us to exist and to navigate this new world. And so, gosh, I think you brought up so many things that would make for a whole separate conversation, I think, as we start to move out of this. Maybe we'll see if your predictions are true here in a few weeks. But I think that I certainly have my questions answered, and I feel pretty good about all of this. So thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time to talk with me today, answer those questions for me, giving me the opportunity to just kind of pick your brain about this kind of stuff from the manager's perspective and sharing that with all of us.
No problem. And thank you for reaching out to me. And I hope that this is helpful to both the managers and from the individual. Like I say before, this transition to working remotely is definitely a hard process. And I'm happy that people are like you are equally as invested in trying to help people navigate this space. And hopefully that this was helpful to somebody.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon, where is the best place that if anybody of my followers or yours, where's the best way to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Brandon Joel. That's me. Also, my email is brandon@truetheoryinc.com. Or you can just
how do you spell True
Facebook.
Theory?
Oh, it's special. TRUTHEORINC.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandon. Of course, if you're interested in any more information, if you're a young professional and you're interested in any information that can help you speak, grow, or rise into a career that you love, then find me on YouTube. My name is Jamie Hammond, or you can find me on my website, www.speakgrowrise.com.
There you have it. We discussed the best ways to communicate with our teams now that many of our teammates are now remote during the coronavirus, some ways that we can communicate and connect with our teams, the importance of being transparent, and more. If you like this video, be sure to like this video and subscribe, and leave a comment about what you're doing to communicate with your team. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.